In late June, a series of battles and skirmishes erupted in the Bohemian hills as the Prussian army launched a multi-sided invasion. The initial clashes took place at Podol, Wysocku, and Trautenau on June 27th. The Austrians suffered significant defeats in the first two battles. However, at Trautenau, the Austrian commander, Ludwig von Gablenz, utilized his numerical advantage and the bravery of his Austrian troops to push back Bonin's First Corps of the Prussian Second Army. He paid a dear price, suffering nearly 4 times as many casualties as the Prussians did. However, due to limited and slow communication channels, it became evident that both sides had to operate independently as the invasion progressed. In the aftermath of the disastrous battle at Podol, the Austrian commander Clam-Gallas found himself with no viable option but to retreat towards Benedek's main army stationed at Josefstadt. Recognizing the overwhelming odds, Clam-Gallas estimated that his Austrian forces, numbering 60,000, were facing approximately 140,000 Prussian troops. He was taken aback and frustrated when Benedek ordered him to hold the Iser River at all costs, despite facing an adversary more than double his strength. To the west, the Prussian Elbe Army under Herwarth von Bittenfeld, which had pushed the Saxon army into Bohemia days earlier, advanced through the mountain passes, and to his north, the Prussian First Army under Prince Friedrich Karl had already given his Austrians a run for their money at Podol. The situation at Glichin necessitated urgent reinforcements as the Prussian Crown Prince Friedrich's army was advancing through the Weißekau passages. To aid the defeated Bonin and secure the final passage needed for their full-scale invasion, Crown Prince Friedrich dispatched the entire Prussian Guard Corps towards Trautenau. Due to Clam-Gallas's failure to establish communication with the headquarters of the North Army, Benedek, the commanding officer, remained unaware of the true situation and held the belief that his forces were adequately positioned to defend against the Prussian invasion. This misconception stemmed from Clam-Gallas's negligence in utilizing the corps telegraph to relay vital information. In the meantime, the Prussian forces engaged in the looting of the towns in northern Bohemia. Bohemia's riches proved enticing to Prince Friedrich Karl, to the extent that he contemplated delaying the crucial march assigned to him by Moltke, originally tasked with heading eastward to Glichin in order to disengage the Second Army at Skarlitz and Trautenau. The prince instead set his sights on achieving a momentous victory in the form of a Kesselschlacht, or encirclement battle. Based on erroneous Prussian intelligence, Prince Friedrich Karl was led to believe that not only the Saxons and the Austrian First Corps were trapped in Münchengrätz, but also the Austrian Second Corps. The prospect of such a significant conquest within close reach fueled his determination. Introducing the sponsor of today's video, Incogni. Tired of data brokers profiting from your personal information without your consent? Incogni is here to help you reclaim your privacy effortlessly. Incogni's mission is to protect you from hackers, invasion of privacy, and shadow profiles, ensuring your sensitive data stays yours alone. No more wasted hours trying to navigate the complex world of data removal. Incogni's automated data removal tool makes it easy, affordable, and effective. By leveraging GDPR, CCPA, and other privacy laws, Incogni forces data brokers to delete your information from their databases. Partnering with consumer privacy advocacy groups, Incogni empowers you with knowledge and support better privacy laws. Join Incogni today and begin your proactive data removal process. Within months, your personal information will be purged, leaving you protected and in control. The first 100 people to use code House of History at the checkout will get 60% off of their subscription. Visit the link in the description. With the belief that a decisive blow could be delivered at Münchengrätz, the Prussian forces under Prince Friedrich Karl quickened their pace. In order to reach their target, the divisions descending from Podol had to navigate between two prominent mounts, Musky Hill, situated east of the town, and Katzov Hill, located approximately 1 kilometer to the north. Meanwhile, General Herwarth, advancing eastward from Hühnerwasser, faced 2 significant obstacles before engaging the Austrian brigades in Münchengrätz: the elevated Kloster monastery on the west bank of the river, followed by the formidable Iser River itself. The Austrian left flank was positioned at Kloster, while Münchengrätz and Katzov Hill formed the centre, and Musky Hill constituted the right wing. In the early hours of June 28th, Crown Prince Albert ordered the retreat to Glitschin to commence at 4 a.m. The cavalry division was given priority and set off first along the Münchengrätz-Glitschin road. The Saxon infantry, on the other hand, embarked on a more circuitous route, marching south to Jungbunzlau, which eventually led them to Gitschin. It is likely that Albert aimed to keep the direct road relatively clear, facilitating the escape of the Austrian wagon train and artillery. Following the cavalry, 2 brigades commanded by Postkaka and Ringelsheim proceeded along the main road. In the retreat, General Clam-Gallas himself opted to join his 2 brigades, effectively leaving his rearguard to manage on their own. While occupied with the retreat, General Clam entrusted Count Leiningen's brigade, accompanied by the 32nd Field Jäger Battalion, with the defence of Münchengrätz. Count Leiningen positioned his Jäger Battalion within the town and stationed his 2 line regiments, the 33rd July and the 38th Hugwitz, across the river in Kloster. On the sandstone slopes of Musky Hill, Ludwig Perret's brigade, comprising the 9th Field Jäger Battalion, the 18th Infantry Regiment Constantine, and the 45th Infantry Regiment Sigismund, took up their defensive positions. Beneath them, Clam's Ebel brigade formed battalion columns and faced the road originating from Podol. The reserve forces included the 22nd Field Jäger Battalion, the 35th Infantry Regiment Kevin Huller, and the 72nd Infantry Regiment Ramming. Around 8:30 a.m., the advance guard of the Army of the Elbe 16th Division made its appearance on the field. This division had marched relentlessly for 8 hours from Hühnerwasser to Kloster. It consisted of 7 battalions from the 31st Brigade, under the command of Major General von Schuler, along with the 8th Jäger Battalion, the 29th Regiment, and the 69th Regiment. The Prussian troops were in a state of frustration, as their arduous march from Hühnerwasser had taken a toll on them. As was often the case, Herwarth's supply trains had lagged behind the men, and at every wayside inn, the Prussian march battalions had discovered depleted provisions and tainted water sources. Upon reaching a location 4 kilometers west of the Iser River, the advancing Prussian forces came under fire from Austrian artillery positioned on the hill at Kloster. Responding swiftly, Major General Scholer directed his own batteries to engage in a counter-battery fire while dispatching 2 infantry columns to flank the Austrian position. Surprisingly, the defenders of the height, including Leiningen's 38th Regiment comprised of Italian troops from Venetia, made minimal effort to hold their ground. Already before Leiningen's troops crossed the bridge and gathered in Münchengrätz, Prince Friedrich Karl had dispatched his brigades from Podol to the south. The vanguard, led by Horn's 8th Division, approached the Musky Hill from the north. Perret and Abel were strategically positioned on the slopes of the hill. The Prussian troops had to storm the slopes if they wanted to advance to Münchengrätz and link up with their Elbe Army counterparts. Prince Friedrich Karl's advanced brigades launched an assault on the northern face of Musky Hill, engaging the forces under Perret and Abele. The sounds of battle from the Podol road convinced Leiningen's brigade they would be stuck in a pincer movement. They deliberately set the bridge on fire to hinder the Elbe Army's advance. Prince Friedrich Karl and his chief of staff, Konstantin Voits-Retz, observed the unfolding battle from their vantage point in Podol. They witnessed the flashes and smoke plumes generated by Herwarth's advancing batteries closing in on Kloster. Then at 10 a.m., sudden eruption of black smoke signaled the ignition of the Iser Bridge. The Prussian prince, upon spotting an Austrian general's entourage through his telescope on Musky Hill, believed that he had effectively trapped the entire Iser army between the converging Elbe and First Armies. Simultaneously, Franzecki's 7th Division, guided by a helpful peasant, maneuvered through the marshland behind the hill, effectively severing the communications of the Austrian defenders with Münchengrätz and Glichen. It became evident that all 3 Austrian brigades stationed in Münchengrätz were at risk of being ensnared within Friedrich Karl's encircling maneuver. Recognizing the peril, the Austrian gunners, who were shelling Horn's column from Musky Hill, swiftly packed up their artillery and departed as Franzecki's forces maneuvered behind them. They retreated as swiftly as possible, passing through Musky village, where platoons from Pire's 45th Regiment, consisting of Venetian soldiers from Verona, were observed discarding their rifles and surrendering to Franzecki's flanking column, their hands raised in surrender. In Münchengrätz, General Leiningen had commenced a retreat toward the east, heading for Sobotka, effectively abandoning the deserted town to Hühnerwasser and the Prussian Elbe Army. Scholer's regiments, suffering from extreme thirst and hunger, took off their shoes, rolled up their trousers, and anxiously awaited orders to wade across the Iser River in search of promised sustenance. By the time Scholer's vanguard reached Cluster, his soldiers were delirious due to their thirst and hunger. Failing to find any nourishment on the western bank of the Iser, they waded across to Münchengrätz, forcefully entered the Wallenstein Palace, and descended into the Ducal Brewery, an underground labyrinth stocked with a cool beer. Kegs were brought to the surface and tapped. If there was ever a moment for Leiningen to launch a counterattack, it would have been at this opportune time. However, the Austrian brigadier was far removed from the situation, already on the outskirts of Münchengrätz and heading east toward Glichen. Thanks to the efforts of Abelé's Czech and Hungarian troops, who held the rugged and overgrown southern slope of Musky Hill, Leiningen and Pire managed to escape to the east, evading Prince Friedrich Karl's flanking column. Most of Abelé's troops ended up getting captured. But it could have been much worse had Friedrich Karl's pincer movement successfully closed on the entire Austrian army or rearguard. Instead, the vast majority got away. The Iser army had eluded him. Friedrich Karl's detour south had proven to be in vain, or at least nearly so. Now the Elbe and First Armies stood side by side, with the consolation of having taken 1,400 Austrian prisoners. In total, the Austrians lost around 3,000 troops. The 5 Prussian divisions that bivouacked in Münchengrätz indulged in an entire night of revelry, drinking in celebration. Their losses in the battle amounted to only 300 fallen comrades, giving them cause for joyous commemoration. Despite the formidable nature of Cluster and Musky Hill as defensive positions, the Prussian forces managed to capture them with the support of only 14 battalions, although Prince Friedrich Karl's left wing remained 50 kilometers away from Friedrich Wilhelm's right wing, with the Austrian North Army positioned between them. Still, that same day clashes occurred to the east at Burkersdorf and Skalitz. And without Prince Friedrich Karl's Prussian army close by, the Crown Prince was unable to act with as much initiative as he would like. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please leave a like, it really helps out the channel. If there is a topic, battle or person you would like to know more about, let me know your thoughts in a comment. I would also like to thank all my patrons and channel members for their generous support. If you enjoy House of History and you want to support my work, consider joining me on Patreon. For just $1 per month, you will already gain early access to all my videos without any in-video advertisements. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.